Okay, so we are up to chapter 4, from chapter to chapter, from verse to verse, just a few sprinklings. And it's really fascinating for me because as I'm preparing, and I've never taught Koheles before in my life, I just see like all these like famous quotes, sukkim, verses. I'm like, oh my gosh, I know that one. I know that. I didn't know it was Koheles. Not that I'm necessarily doing all the famous ones. I just like everywhere I look, it just pops out at me like another one, another one, another one. It's very exciting. All right, so let's go to chapter 4. Verse 3. In chapter 4, Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, begins by saying, life is hard. There's a lot of challenge. There's a lot of things that we deal with. And in the second verse, he said that we could say, in a sense, that the dead are more fortunate than the living. But then he goes on in verse 3 and says, but better than either of them meaning the living or the dead, is he who has not yet been born and has never witnessed the evil that is committed beneath the sun. Koheles here is the name. Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, is giving himself in this work, as we explained in the beginning, why he calls himself Koheles. So he's saying life could be so challenging that we could say, wow, the dead are better off. But even better than that is someone that never actually had to enter this world and go through everything that we go through. And here specifically, he's focusing on what we call social injustice, crimes man perpetrates against man, and explaining how deeply, deeply painful that is. Because if something happens to you and it's sort of like hand of God, struck by lightning or some other natural disaster, natural consequence, it doesn't have the same pain as when a person really feels another person is causing his harm. It hurts on a whole different level, even though the harm might be the same in both of the different scenarios. So really, when we know that another person is creating my harm, it really hurts very, very, very deeply. So deeply that Shlomo HaMelech, the King Solomon, is saying, like, it's better not to be born than to deal with this. Now, again, that's the surface level of what he's saying. Obviously, there are deeper and deeper and deeper understandings. Like, just to give you one level, difference between the living and the dead, or the dead could be referring actually to the incredibly righteous. We call it tzaddikim, the most holy people, who are so holy they have been like removed themselves from the physical, from the material, from the corporeal, from all those things that entrap us. So they've like escaped those bounds. So they're alive, but they're dead from those things that bind and limit man. Maybe that's what he means on a much deeper level. Or comparatively, again, in the Midrash, speaking about this, when we're saying the dead are better than the living, a reference could be the living is Moses and the dead is Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Moshe versus Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Because in a certain scenario, when Moshe was trying to bring down compassion for the Jews that had sinned, God said nothing doing. But then when he evoked the merit of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, God forgave. We see the dead have a power the living don't. Or King Solomon himself, when he built the Beis HaMikdash, when he built the temple, and the fire didn't come down from heaven, representing the Shekhinah, the divine presence, God. And when he evoked the merit of his father, King David, then immediately the fire came down. So, the dead have a power the living don't. Obviously, Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, was perfectly, absolutely righteous, as was his father, King David, but yet King David's merit did something his couldn't. So there's many, many levels going on here, but we're going to be simplistic. We're going to say simply that King Solomon is saying the most simple, literal meaning beyond all the deeper, deeper, deeper levels, of which there are myriads and myriads and myriads. Kind of getting into Kabbalistic or Hasidic, we're just very much on the surface. Life is challenging. There's a lot of hard things that happen to us in life. And yet, of course, life is worth it. Life is worth living. Looking and saying the challenge, I think the point here really is God knows this. This is written in a holy text, one of the 24 books of scriptures, Ksuvim. God is saying, yes, I understand sometimes it's very difficult, and I appreciate it. I appreciate that even though it's tough, even though sometimes it's very tough, but you're still consistent, you're still serving, you're still focused. If you would think of a time, you could think of a time when you felt God really appreciated that. I did something that I know gave him nachat, pleasure, joy. You could think of something you've done and you felt like, yeah, I know God really, really appreciated that. Whatever you're thinking of, I'm sure, I could be wrong, of course, and you could tell me I'm wrong, but most probably a component of what you're thinking of, why you felt then that God really appreciated it, was because it was difficult. And very often, and again, it's very personal to each person what difficult means. For one person, a no-brainer, for another person, incredibly challenging. We all have different triggers. But when we're doing something really difficult and we're still doing it, we have this sense inside of us of, I gave God a lot of joy. God was really happy. I know that gave God pleasure. I know God appreciated that. And it's true. It's literally true. It's not just something we tell ourselves. The sages say, Lefum Sa'ara Agra. According to the effort, according to the difficulty, that's the reward. Now, obviously, for each one of us, that's very, very personalized because each one of us has different things that are incredibly difficult. But God knows. He knows what's difficult for us. He knows what's challenging for us. He knows how hard we're working. Someone else could look and think, you're barely whatevering. But you know how much you're pushing to do that, something that nobody else would think of as very impressive. But for you, it's really impressive. Like sometimes we speak about this idea of gifting the world with your strength, gifting the world with your weakness. So if you're really good at something, if you're a wonderful hostess and love to cook and love to entertain and always invite so many people to your Shabbos table or your holiday table, that's beautiful. You're gifting the world with your strength and everyone's like in awe of your skills and you love it and it's great and it's beautiful and it's wonderful. And if it's really, really, really hard for you to have guests for whatever myriad of reasons, and you push yourself and have one over, nobody's talking about you. Nobody's in awe. Nobody's complimenting. Nobody's thinking about it. That was gifting the world with your weakness. That was doing something that was personally so challenging that it literally gifts the world. It literally changes the energy by giving God your weakness. So that's really the emphasis here. That's really the point here. For all of us, we have things that we do and we love. And when we're doing that, we're God's child. And we all have things that are really hard. And when we're doing that, we're God's servant. We're God's slave. We're God's soldier. We're nullifying ourselves and making space for him. And the more that's hard for us to do that, the more literally God appreciates it. God values it because he values so much our effort. Did anyone have a situation they'd like to share where they really felt that they were really maybe doing something nobody else would have noticed, but was really, really hard. And they really felt like, it was very appreciated by God because it was very, very hard. Okay, well, that was a thought from chapter 4. We're going to skip to chapter 5. So in chapter 5, we're going to go to verse 8. Now, in chapter 5, verse 8, I'm going to just indulge. I don't know if indulge is the right word. And explain something on a deeper level. Basically, as we're doing this, I'm trying to give over the literal meaning, which is very powerful. And again, there's many levels we don't do, but I said, let me just give you one and just to show you what I mean, but what's under the surface on a much deeper level. So this is chapter 5, verse 8. The advantage of land is supreme. Even a king is indebted to the soil. Now has a lot of literal meanings and a lot of midrashic meanings and references, allusions, and Kabbalistic and Hasidic meanings as well. So I'm going to share with you a Hasidic meaning on this, just to have that little bird's eye view on the depth embedded in these words that we would never think of. So the advantage of earth is supreme, is over all. The king is indebted to the soil. So on a Kabbalistic level, on a Hasidic level, what we're saying here is, what's the advantage of earth? Earth is lowest. The earth is what everyone steps on, right? Everyone's stepping on the earth. And yet we see that God invested the greatest powers of life, of growth in the earth. What do I mean by that? We look in the world around us. Monkeys produce monkeys. People produce people. Turtles have turtles. Like, everybody can continue their own species. That's a tremendous power. It's what helps us stay eternal. But the earth was given a far greater power because the earth has a power of growth that when you put that seed in it, from the power of growth of the earth elicits a force that seed creates life. What's the life? Whatever that seed is. If it's tomatoes, if it's tulips, all of the variety that we can't even fathom of plant life is all being fed from the power of creation in the earth. You don't think of it that way. But that's actually what's happening. So God only to the earth gave the ability of creating life in so many different kinds. Nothing else has it, just the earth. So it's sort of weird. On one hand, earth symbolizes that which is the lowest. It's literally on the bottom. It's literally what the world is stepping on. All the world, not just aggressive, nasty people. Every animal, human, it's creepy crawly, they're all stepping on the earth. It's the lowest, it's the bottom. And yet the earth has a unique power of life that nothing else in creation has. So why did God do this? Because this is really representing this very deep truth that in our world, as it says in the Midrash, our world is an upside down world. And that which is truly above seems below, and that which is below seems above. And even in God's energies, we see this same thing. God has 10 creative expressions, 10 divine attributes. And number 1 is the top, and number 10 is the bottom. So he has the highest, then the second, then the third, then the fourth, all the way to the 10th. So the 10th is the lowest, it's the bottom. It's called Malchus, sovereignty. And actually it says Kabbalistically, Les le migarmuhu klum. Sovereignty has nothing of her own. She's an empty vessel. She only has from what she's given by others. Just as it says in a sense, so we wouldn't think of it this way, but a king has nothing. You know, a regular person, they have fields, they farm, they have wheat, they can make bread. A king, he's stuck in a palace. He's still relying on the people to feed him, to give him all of his needs. He has nothing of his own. Sovereignty has nothing of its own. It's number 10. It's the bottom. It's the lowest. And it's God's power of creation. God creates only through sovereignty. Sovereignty is God's power of creation. It's God's power of speech. It's how anything is made, is happening. It's through the lowest one, number 10, the one that has nothing on the bottom, and there is embedded the greatest strength. So it's a powerful lesson in our world, because in our world, we have a lot of things, what seems stronger, you know, like so much in our world, like men versus women, the sun versus the moon, and in general, the physical versus the spiritual. That we can look at the world, and what seems to have a lot more strength is the physical domain. That seems very powerful and all over and taking up so much space and noise and time and making a loud storm. And then there's this ethereal thing, this like gossamer, something that you can't exactly touch, and that's the whole spiritual energy. That seems, so to speak, on the bottom, like the moon versus the sun, like the woman versus the man. But obviously embedded in the spiritual is such a power, if only we can extract it. So obviously everyone here has come to a realization of that, because that's why you're doing this now and not watching Netflix. You know, so there's some energy you're sensing in that spiritual. Do you remember when it hit you? When you realize that this is where the power is at? Might have been a gradual realization, but sometimes there's sort of like this epiphany moments of like, I have to prioritize this. I have to focus on this. This is where the power is at. This is what's important.
Okay, I think I missed it. What is it that the power is at? And that's
spirituality, as versus this. In other words, just like the earth seems on the bottom, gets
right.
on, and God invested in it such power of life.
Okay.
Parallel to God's lowest 10th divine attribute, Malchus, sovereignty. It's the lowest, it's the weakest, it has nothing, and it is the power of God's creation. So also in our world, we have that dynamics of things that seem lower and are really more powerful.
Okay.
Like women versus men, and like the spiritual versus the physical. So I was asking, I said everyone here obviously knows that. That's why you're on this class. But do you have a time when when it clicked, when you realized, when you came to that point of saying, I want to prioritize spiritual. I want to focus on spiritual. That can feed me in a way that nothing physical can.
I think I've always felt that way.
You
I
always
don't
felt
think there
that
was,
way?
I think so.
Wow.
I think so. I think when it became maybe stronger is when my father was sick and it's like you're helpless. There's nothing you can do. I can't cure cancer, but that's when I stepped up like my Tehillim and my tzedakah. That's when no, I didn't start davening back then. I don't know, just that's when like, every time he needed like a Yeshua, that's when I would, increase my observance or something. And then you realize that I guess the spiritual counts in as much as the physical.
Bouncing more.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I had a bracha party here. He was in the hospital for a month and they were being very dire, but he lived for another year after that.
Oh, wow.
Um, and very dire. And, I said, you're doctors, you're not God, you don't give time. And I had a bracha party at my house. And it was for my cousins who are very Jewishly connected, but not really so observant. But they were really into it. Someone gave like a little spiel on the parsha, and we said brachot on all the foods. It was something that many of them have never done. And the next day, my dad's like, kidney numbers and whatever they were the best they'd been in like weeks. I mean, they didn't say that way, but at least for a day or two, they were good. They were better. And I told that to all my cousins and I praised that it was, the power of our prayers, I guess. So, but it wasn't an aha moment. I always knew that was the case. It's just, I had to step up my game to access it, I guess.
Well, maybe because you knew it, and then when you felt vulnerable, you turned to it.
Yeah,
Once you turned to it and developed that muscle, even as your life continued, you didn't lose it. You felt
correct.
like it's a gain and you're not going backward. Precious that you always knew that. Miriam, would you say similarly?
Yeah, yeah, I agree with Yael.
That's something you always knew, and then things sometimes happen in life that focus you.
Yeah, I'm more of a spiritual person. Yeah.
So it's a gift when you feel you
Is
always
it?
do it. It's a gift because not, I mean, of course, every Jew innately is a spiritual person because the core of a Jew is soul, and we can't even fathom what soul means. But some people have an easier time accessing it. Some people, that soul is more dominant, or somehow its voice is more heard based on the power of soul, based on how the parents behave during conception of the child. So there's more affinity for that soul to be voiced and expressed, based on a lot of different things in the nature of the person and how much that soul can just freely talk through that person. And then we find ourselves being very spiritual people. And that's why over time, it says, interestingly enough, that it says there's three partners in the formation of a child: a father, a mother, and God. It says that your early years, the dominant energy is your father. Then it becomes the dominant energy is your mother. And then it becomes a dominant energy is God. It explains, therefore, now again, this is for most people. This is obviously individuals could have differences, but for most people, the male energy is much more physical than the female energy. And the female energy in general is more refined than the male. So in the beginning years, like the first, I don't know, whatever, however many third of your life, when it's the male energy that's so dominant, that's when people are usually at their most corporeal. They're most drawn to this world. And then it shifts, and the major energy is coming from that mother energy, which already is a whole shift in a person's refinement and a person's sensitivity to God. Because females in general, again, there are many exceptions to the rule, but the general rule definitely is that females are less corporeal. They're less drawn and enslaved to all the physicality, and men are much more. So when people shift and it becomes the mother's energy that's dominant, then people start allowing that spirituality to more and more rule their life. And then the last portion of a person's life, the dominant energy is that portion from God. And that's why for most people, again, there are always exceptions, but for most people, that last slice of their life, they're at the time when it's easiest for them to connect to God, to hear God's voice, to serve God, to really feel God's presence, because that's really the main power they're drawing from. Of course, it doesn't mean we have to wait till we're older, but that is as we're told, the pattern. Godliness is powerful stuff. There's a famous story with one of the most famous converts. So we've had many very holy converts, Koheles. So Koheles was the nephew of the Caesar of Rome. And when he wanted to convert, he had to think of a way to get away from the palace and sneak off to Israel. So he told his uncle, the Caesar, he didn't just want to be this, idle prince in the palace. He wanted to go out, see the world, make himself, earn his fortune. Uncle said, great idea. He said, so Uncle said to his uncle, the Caesar, do you have any business advice for me? He said, yeah, buy something that people don't realize its value. So you could buy it when it's cheap, you get a lot of it. And then when everyone realizes its value, you could cash in and make a lot of money. Wow, great, brilliant, thanks so much. He goes off, he goes to Israel, he converts. And of course, his uncle was furious. What a disgrace to the family. And he sent one legion of soldiers to bring him back, and Uncles managed to inspire all of them, and they became converts, and a second legion and a third legion. And finally, at a certain point, Uncles felt secure enough that he knew he was safe, and he on his own went back to his uncle, like to, patch things up. And his uncle said, what did you do? He said, I listened to your advice. You told me, look for what the world doesn't value, but's truly valuable. That's what you should invest in. And that's exactly what I did. So in our lives as well, we go through phases where so much work, it's so much effort, it's so much discipline to invest so much time in prayer, like I was saying, prioritizing, Tehillim, charity. Life is very busy and takes up a lot of time and a lot of space, and other things get in the way. And then when we hear that voice, or we prioritize, we say, no, we're putting the spiritual ahead of the physical. It's not like, well, doctors have an ability and spirituality helps. No, God rules. Spirituality is what determines. And doctors are tools. And that's exactly as Yael said, doctors don't have any ability except to heal. And if a doctor ever says anything except for healing, that's out of their jurisdiction. So when we put spiritual first, we're saying, this is what's real. This is what makes it. Go through the physical because that's what God wants, because it's his world and it's a physical world, and he wants us to follow the rules of nature. But that's the only reason we're doing it. Because what cures is spiritual. As what creates your fortune is spiritual. As what helps your relationships is spiritual. So again, like this verse from Koheles, that which seems on the bottom and that which you step on, and in it is embedded the greatest strengths. So in the spiritual, that unfortunately can get pushed aside, not just a 21st century thing, it's happening since creation. Pushed aside, we don't have time for it. It's not so important. It's on the bottom when it fits into our schedule. And in that, God embedded the greatest strengths. All right. So that was a verse from chapter 5, verse 8, and now we're jumping to chapter 7. And again, just getting a few verses here, a few verses there, and different examples of what King Solomon is doing here. So here he's talking about the fool or the empty person or the evil person versus wisdom or the more godly person. So he says in verse 6, like the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of fools. It's all emptiness, hevel, vanity, nothingness. So what King Solomon here is saying is, you put thorns under a pot. No, you don't heat it up with thorns. You heat it up with wood. Well, why don't we heat it up with thorns? A lot of thorns all over the place. They're easier to cut than wood. Because thorns, if you ignite them, they make a lot of noise. They make this a big fire, and then it's extinguished. So you put your pile of thorns, you put your combustible, you'll put your match in, and it all catches fire, and oh, wow, there's going to be this huge fire. My chicken soup will cook or my water will boil. Nope, because it's big noise, and it's gone. Didn't do anything but blacken the pot. Nothing got cooked. King Solomon is saying those crackling of the thorns, those igniting those thorns, or it makes a lot of noise and then it's gone and didn't do anything worthwhile. That's like the laughter, the noise, the levity, the loudness of the fools. Again, fools not meaning people that aren't as smart, but meaning people that are leading a foolish, empty life. They can make a lot of noise, and then it's nothingness. And of course, I think this is very, very expressive of our whole world, because there's a lot of noise from a lot of things in our world that like pull at us, that make noise, and you're supposed to dress like this or eat like this or talk like this or use these terms, and what's trending and what's trending and what's in and what's, and then if you look at what's trending, it's like, oh my gosh, what is the world into? Very
Yeah.
loud laughter of the fools.
It's so true. That's an example I was going to give. Like, I watch TV and I'm like, what is going on here? It's disgusting. I can't even, I'm so sensitive to it. I'm like, I can't, like, I change it. Like, even if it's a commercial and I see like such garbage, it's women who are like, how do they dress like that? I don't get it. I don't understand.
But then what does it help to change the channel? The other channel's better, or you just
No. But I'm just saying, like, it's, I feel like maybe, I don't know. It's bad.
do you think it's getting worse, or do you think you're getting more sensitive?
I think I'm just more sensitive. I don't think it's getting worse. I think it's always been there.
I remember when we had the good old days when we had in-person classes and you were talking. It was maybe some big NFL game or something, and some lady at halftime that was singing, and your response was like, you just saw how like almost naked she was,
Yeah, exactly.
how provocative it was, and other people were saying like, oh, I thought she had such a nice voice. And you were like,
I know. And
eventually really my son's watching her.
She was like half naked. It was terrible. Like, this is what we're showing to our children who are watching this. Like, it just affected me. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember. So that's the crackling of the thorns, the laughter of the fools. That's exactly what it means. That these things that the world is saying, look at me. Let me take off more, say, look at me more. Look at me. I'm making a lot of noise. I literally, if you would literally want to know the headspace of the world, just waste a second of your time and go on Google Trends. And you'll be like, oh my gosh, what is this world obsessed with? Like, whoa, okay, good, I'm not in it. Or no, I am, but good, I can rise above it. And that's exactly what King Solomon means. Watch out for the laughter of the fools. It's all hevel. Hevel is a word he uses several times in Koheles. It's all emptiness. It's all nothingness. It makes a lot of noise and it has absolutely no substance. So when the world is telling you, you must, you should, then you say, whoa, whoa. This is that loud noise, the laughter of the fools. Not what I need to listen to. That's that verse. And the next verse, so that was verse 6. Verse 7 says, for oppression, meaning this pressure from the fools, makes the wise foolish. And then there's a phrase that could be interpreted in two ways. V'yabed is lev matana, and he will lose his heart, his wisdom, which is God's gift to him. Meaning, the verse that we just did, verse 6, was saying, it's nothing. Don't be taken in by all that noise. Imagine you put a flame to thorns, make so much flame, and it's gone. It didn't do anything. You want the slow, steady fire of the wood, not the burst from the thorns that did nothing. You hear all this noise from the fools, from the empty ones. It's nothing. It's meaningless. Stay away. And then the next verse he's saying, and you know what happens if you don't stay away? It affects you. It pulls you down. So Miriam was saying when she's watching TV and she sees something, oh my gosh, she switches the channel. I said, so what do you gain? Maybe a few minutes, I should switch that channel. It's bombarding us. And King Solomon says, then you lose your wisdom. Again, wisdom doesn't just mean like, well, this person is not so smart, this person is smart. Why is King Solomon being mean? There are people that are not smart in this world. He means the emptiness, the foolishness, the evil. And the wise doesn't just mean like, it doesn't mean someone who's smarter. You can be very smart and foolish. It means godly, more righteous, more connected. And the more the godly person is bombarded and absorbs the bombardment of the foolishness of this world, King Solomon says, don't fool yourself. It's going to impact. It's going to affect you. We have another concept sort of similar. Our sages say, Hamisavek eminavel mitnavel, which means when you fight with someone who's dirty, you become dirty. So again, fighting more implies not like if you're watching TV or what's trending or going shopping and wanting to look. It doesn't mean that. It means where someone's attacking you. But it's a very similar concept. Someone's attacking you, so our knee-jerk reaction is to fight back. I mean, just to defend yourself. What are you, a schmata, a ditch rag? You can stand up for yourself. Our sages say, don't. Rise above. Don't fall below to their level. Why? They're attacking me. Yeah. But when you fight with someone who's dirty, you get dirty. When you engage with someone who's not in a good space, it pulls you down. And you get sucked into their issues, into their problems, into their negativity. I've definitely seen that in my life. Definitely have seen that in my life. You know, rise above, don't join them. You know, don't engage, don't get pulled in, rise above, rise above, rise above. Anyone else here has experienced that or have not and realized that this is a smarter advice? Well, I definitely have. And it's a very similar concept. King Solomon is saying, don't feel you're impervious to influence. I'm a wise person. I'm a godly person. I know that's garbage. I'm just listening to be sociable, to be pleasant. He says it doesn't work that way. When you're absorbing the influence, it affects you till the end. You will lose the heart, the most precious thing, the wisdom God gave you as a gift. Now, again, there's many ways to look at everything here. So a very different way of looking at those words is if you take presents, you're going to get destroyed because it's not so good to be reliant on other people and presents. But following along thematically from the beginning of the verse, it means you're going to lose the present that God gave you. God gave you that wisdom, that spirituality, that sensitivity. And it's a very precious thing, sensitivity. It's a very precious thing having a sense of spiritual. And if you're surrounded by people that don't, and by noise and by movements that are going in a different direction, you can lose yours as well. That's what King Solomon is saying there. And let's just do one more verse, or maybe we'll do more. We'll see. The next verse says, sort of continuing this idea, the end of the matter is better than its beginning. Patience is better than pride. Patience is better than pride. In the Hebrew, it sounds also very well expressed. Tov erech ruach, patience, migoiva ruach, from pride. The end is better than the beginning. Why? Because a lot of times you have to wait for the end to understand what's really going on. Beginnings can be exciting. You know, things start off and it's fresh, like first day of schools or whatever that's coming up soon. We're all eager, but we don't really see something until its end. Just as we speak in terms of a person's life, where we say, King Solomon said also, Tov yom hamavish b'yom hivoldo. Better is the day of death than the day of birth. And we're like, that's weird. The day of birth is when the mazel tovs happen. The day of death is very different. True. But at the end of a person's life, you can look back and see what you accomplished. You can see what you did with the gift called life. And in the beginning, it's all potential. We have no clue. Now, of course, some people leave this world truly poor because they didn't maximize the gift of life. But many people hopefully leave this world laden, rich, with all the good they've accrued over a lifetime of serving God. And then you look back and like, wow, what was accomplished? What was accomplished by a meaningful life? So the ends have an advantage over the beginning. And for that same reason, that's why this flows. Suddenly he's saying patience is better than pride. Meaning, if your pride, anger comes from the same energy. So if someone like upsets you and then you impetuously respond, patience, wait for the end. You'll see how things pan out at the end. It might look very different than now. The example our sages give for this is actually Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon's father. David HaMelech, King David. What happened to him that was such a ultimate example of this, so to speak? David had a very tragic life. If you want to know, it was a very difficult, unbelievable life. Just read through the Navi, read through prophets. You could do the Medrash Says version of it in English. He went through so much and emerged. Unbelievable. That's what Tehillim is saturated in. The tears, the depth, the life wisdom from a lot. So one of the many very incredibly unbelievable difficult things that King David went through was when his own son staged a rebellion against him. His son Avshalom rebelled against him and almost won, which makes no sense to us. This is David HaMelech, Jewish people, where are you? But whatever. So Avshalom took over, and King David said, I don't want to make a fight here in the city of Jerusalem, in Ir David, in the city of David. I don't want to do that. There'll be such a loss of life. I'm leaving. So King David chose to leave instead of to literally have his men fight against Avshalom and his men in the city proper. So he's leaving, and there's many, many, many details of the story, but we're not learning Novi now, so I won't go into it. But King David is leaving, and this is horrific. He's been the king of the Jewish people, and now he's like running away. And literally, we're told that one of the very wicked advisors of Shalom had a plan, and they could have destroyed David that night. But that wasn't God's will, and therefore God sent other foolish people to give Avshalom foolish advice, and Avshalom foolishly listened to the foolish people, and therefore didn't follow the wise, wicked advice, and King David was spared. So here's King David running away with his few faithful men, and Shimi ben Gera goes out. Shimi ben Gera was another one of these like weirdly happening a lot in the times of King David, people that seemingly were so virtuous and knowledgeable and looked up to and were rotten at their core. So that was Shimi ben Gera, rotten at his core. He sees King David and he starts cursing him and throwing stones. He was pelting him with stones and cursing him. And the men that were with David said, this person's a moirid b'malchus. He's a rebel. Let's kill him. And go kill him with a sword, which is the law. If someone rebels against the king, this is rebelling big time, pelting him with stones and cursing him. And King David said, no, I don't need to do this now. We're going to wait. No. And he wouldn't let his men do anything to harm Shimi. And what happened? After this event, Shimi fathered a child who was the ancestor of Mordechai. And our sages say, because David had that long-term vision, again, maybe David saw that no, Shimi has to have another child. From that child will come Mordechai. Or maybe he just understood that I don't have to rush to do anything now. Patience is better than pride. Yes, if I'm full of pride, sense of self, look what this upstart is doing, salt on the wounds of what just happened to me, that my own son rebelled against me and is, oh, now this one I could handle. Okay, maybe I can't handle the whole rebellion now, but this one guy would be very easy for me to knock off. No, there's always time. You can always take care of it later. We're going to wait and see how things pan out. That, coupled with the Ruach HaKodesh, I need to leave him alive for now. If he knew Mordechai was coming with him, or he just knew he needed to be alive, I need to leave him alive for now. And from him came the child who was the ancestor of Mordechai, who, of course, many years later was the savior of the Jews. There, when we needed him, because King David did not kill Shimi at that moment. So obviously we might not be in exactly these circumstances, hopefully no curses, hopefully no stones, hopefully no Shimi ben Gera, but in our own lives as well, we have situations. We have situations where we can get offended and angry and feel how we are being insulted and it's such an affront, or we can breathe and say, the end is better than the beginning. Patience is better than pride. Let's see how these things pan out. I don't have to react now. I can wait a day. I can wait 2 days. I can wait 3 days. I can let everything, all the tempers blow over and then respond. And then maybe if I respond, it will actually be heard as versus now when it won't be. Ends better than the beginning, and patience better than pride.